My mom used to tell me stories of our Native American heritage and our connection to the land and environmentalism. And then growing up in New York, it's just, there's garbage everywhere and you're disconnected from nature entirely. And so I fancy myself righteous to try and help the environment. Of course, this Al Gore documentary and these stories of environmental destruction were starting to permeate, my awareness. So I started doing environmental work. I started Lonely Well, which was an ocean organization, and we were focusing on single-use plastics. I ended up becoming a UN Environment Ambassador. And I was, I pretty much just did a lot of work to help, to do charity, environmental charity and otherwise. But
did you quit all that when you stopped working for Entourage?
No, I kept it up.
Okay.
In fact, this sort of smug virtue signaling, as you say, was an annoyance from my colleagues on Entourage, because they'd come in, with a plastic cup and a straw, and I'm like, they'd be like, oh, sorry, They'd see the way I would look at them, look down on them.
Right.
And I started to realize there's such an arrogance in the environmental movement, where people really believe they're holier than thou. They believe that they know what's wrong and that they know what the solution is.
Right.
And then they, point down at you.
Yeah.
And it's not inspiring, at least, and it's most likely in many ways wrong. So I started to realize that I wanted to be a little bit more measured in my approach, and that, I relented, I guess, to my activism. And I didn't. And when people say, "Oh, Adrian Green, environmental activist," I was like, "No, don't use that word. It just feels so aggressive." And
well, there's something about activism that seems to have a lot to do with changing other people.
Yeah,
and that's definitely a moral hazard. I mean, the story you told me on the YouTube side was that, you were living a lifestyle that's associated with the rich and famous, and with everything that came along with that. And you were shaking your finger at people who were using plastic straws, right? So,
well, and more than that, we started me and my organization. It was my idea to do a straw campaign, and in fact, we popularized the whole. We called it "Stop Sucking."
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're responsible for the fact that there aren't plastic straws. I saw the funniest thing the other day. It was a photograph, and I don't know if it was real, of a paper straw in a plastic wrapper.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I loved that. That was perfect. That was absolutely perfect.
Well, look, I can defend it, right? It was a noble communications challenge, right? So when I'm looking at the ocean, because I'd go scuba diving or go out into the ocean, and you'd see plastic everywhere, and that's a real problem, right? And when you hear the statistics that 10 million tons of plastic makes its way into the ocean every year, it's like, how do you even begin to tackle a problem that big? It's so abstract, right? It's like 10 million tons, like, okay, what do you do? And so I wanted to bring it down to something
concrete
tangible.
level. Yeah.
So I was like, well, what's the single unit of plastic? What is that? Oh, it's a straw. It's something that everybody encounters every day that they can have agency to do something about. You can refuse the straw. And for me, it felt like a gateway to, the bigger challenge.
Yeah.
And I think it caught on because of that. It wasn't so much fix plastic straws and we're totally healed.
Yeah.
It was more just, here's something we're doing. And it had, catchy, viral, slogan, Stop Sucking.
Yeah.
And that was part of what I was doing, was communications, like the communications department for the oceans. How do we get people to connect with, actually our mission at Lonely Well was not to heal or fix anything. Our mission was to connect people to the ocean, to bring more intimacy and awareness. So we did our job in that, and I'm proud of that for what it's worth. But there still is this sense that we are going to save the earth. There's a savior complex. Right?
So what was the difference? What would you say the difference was between the efforts that you made, let's say on the activism side, with regard to, we can just use the straw issue, and the time that you spent by yourself after you had decided that you were going to change your life, right? Those are different levels of moral endeavor. So how would you compare and contrast them personally?
There's just this abstraction when you're taking on the whole entire world and all the systems there within. You know, when you're trying to fix legislation around the globe, when you have different, you know, governments that have different laws. Recycling, there's not one standard of recycling. What can be recycled in any state?
Yeah.
Right? So you have all the...
Yeah, and much of it ends up in landfills and so forth.
Because all the different materials are clogging up a recycling system that might actually work.
Yeah.
So unless you're doing a top-down, authoritarian, you know, just unified recycling system,
right,
then you're left with individual municipalities doing what they do. So it's just extremely complex. So my belief that we can just ban it or stop it, or, you know, you would need a certain amount of tyranny to be able to accomplish that.
Yeah. Well, and that turns out to be a major problem.
Right.
Yeah, because that tyrannical attitude tends to spread very rapidly too.
Right.
And my impression is that the consequence of that, and I think that's unfolding everywhere, is that will be very hard on the poor. So anything you do to make anything more expensive, energy, for example, immediately affects the poor. And that has a downstream effect on the environment, which is very negative. Now, one of the things I've come to realize, investigated, was that the fastest pathway forward to something approximating environmental sustainability is to eliminate poverty. And the best way to do that is to make energy cheap. I don't see any alternative to those pathways forward if we were actually serious about the problem. And then it would also have the additional benefit that people wouldn't be, you know, starving and burning dung and dying from indoor air pollution and so forth. But, so you said that one of the differences was level of abstraction, right?
Yes.
But, I mean, you could argue, and people who are on the activist side would argue, that you sorting out your life was a moral endeavor, but so was what you were trying to do at the systems level. But when push came to shove, when you actually changed your life, you did that. I mean, you changed your life.
Yes.
Right? So when you were alone in your camper for a year, you weren't fixing other people.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
So that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the distinction between those two things, and also what that did for you.
What it does is it gives me a felt sense of accomplishment. It gives me I can navigate through life and know where I am, whereas I never knew what I did, if it had an effect or not.
Right. That's part of that problem of abstraction.
Just telling stories, you know, hoping things change, or, you know, and often it's like it requires legislation. So you think you're influencing people, and, you know, if we all come together and make the change, then something will happen. Every day I go out and what I do has an effect, and it's responsive immediately.
Right.
I know that I forgot to feed the goats because they're screaming at me, or water the plants because they're dying, or whatever it is. There's this tangible immediacy, and I mean, it's like the music we were talking about before. Like it's just, I know where I am. I'm here, and what I'm doing is my responsibility, and I can totally be responsible because I can see it.
Yeah, right.